What is going on, everyone? My name's Boit, and it's time to talk fortification patch and what I reckon. So today marks the day that I've actually had some time to sit down, put my thoughts into words, and try to actually understand what's going on, why it's going on, and most importantly, how I feel about it all. I'm not speaking for the community here. I'm speaking for myself. I expect disagreement to what I'm going to be saying, and that's fine. So here go. The fortification patch has been out now for a few weeks, and I've been playing the game a lot. I've tried a whole bunch of different strategies, from one town center craziness, rushes, two town center stuff, spamming towers, the works. I've learned what is good, what's not so good, but to tell you the truth, I think I'm a long way from getting there. Now, the big first question is, do I like it? Well, it's AOM. I love AOM. Nothing's going to take that away from me. But if you ask the real question, which is, do I like this patch more than I like the last patch, the recent patch? The answer is a resounding no. I think that this patch is less fun than the patch that just came. I already put out a video stating that this is probably the most imbalanced state that Age of Mythology Retold's been in. I stand by that. It's really frustrating as a player who plays all the gods. I could easily just sit there and play something that's overpowered and probably get like a 90+% win rate on the ladder, but that's not fun for me. However, it's also not fun for me to know that I'm going into a game where I'm just behind from the beginning, or know that if a game reaches a certain point, I may as well just resign. This simply wasn't the case in the previous patch. Putting aside the balance, this is something that can be worked out, and I expect it to get better over time. What are the real differences? I put this into three main categories: buildings damage skyrocketing, villager train time, and the trade caravan buff. Let's start with the tower. This is probably the change I dislike the most. Towers, 10 DPS to 18 DPS. That's an 80% increase. Crenellations, this is a technology which gives ballistics to your ranged buildings or your damaging buildings, and also gives a buff to Cav. This went from 1.25 to 1.5, or in plain speak, 12.5 DPS to 27 DPS at base. Just looking at the numbers makes my head hurt. These two changes have effectively eliminated any sort of serious early game rating potential from the game. Granted, it was already pretty limited in the previous patch, and oftentimes you were probably deciding on whether or not to go for heavy raids based on your opponent's map layout. But now I don't even think there's a decision. Just don't do it. If I see my opponent make a stable, 100 resources, a cavalry, 120 resources, I'm more than happy to just grab watchtowers. If I see them build a couple more cav, now I'm happy to grab crenellations. My opponent is left thinking, well, I guess I got a couple of resource advantage here. And I'm left thinking what I'm going to have for dinner tonight. I'd love to say that this is an oversimplification of the strategy, but this is literally the go-to plan right now for several gods. In other news, coming to a YouTube playlist near you, an AFK player's guide to Hades. But seriously, I'm going to put a tutorial out for Hades. It's going to be fun. Now, let's ask ourselves the real question. Was 10 DPS towers too little? Maybe. Is 27 DPS towers versus Cav too much? Yes. Is there a number somewhere in the middle? Of course. The next building to look at is the TC. Now, before you guys yell, boy, they didn't buff the TC at all, you dummy. Well, I mean, no, but yes. In crenellations, it exists. Versus Cav, the base damage, it went from 25 in the previous patch to 30 right now. That's not that big of a deal. It's a smaller buff than the tower buff, but, it's not that insignificant. Let's say I have 12 farmers sitting around a TC and my opponent comes to raid them. I hit the seek shelter hotkey, and all of a sudden I have 48 DPS of town center. Now this is up from 40 DPS in that situation, but nonetheless, you guys will say, well, that's 12 villagers sitting AFK there. That's a win for your opponent. But then you forget that I probably killed at least one cav in that situation, equaling somewhere between 90, 120 resources. That's 10 seconds of idle time, 9 to 10 seconds of idle time for those villagers. I'm in front by a long way here. Is that different from before? Well, no. But when you add the towers to it, you get a grand total of base defense DPS moving from 60, this is 4 towers and a town center, mind you, to 92 versus regular units. 75 to 138 versus cav. I don't think these numbers are okay. Defender's advantage is already a massive thing in Asian mythology, and this literally breaks the scales. The next building is the castle. First and foremost, what is a castle? In AoE 2 and AoE 4, it's primarily a defensive structure. In AoE 4, you can't build anything from them. In AoE 2, I believe you can get a petard, the exploding dude, a trebuchet, and a unique unit. In AoM, castles are actually primarily a production building. You need these to simply build units. Egyptian gets chariots, camel rider, elephant, Norse, Huskar, very important unit. China gets their cavalry. Atlantean gets a destroyer, fanatic, fire siphon. Greek, kind of similar to in Age of Empires 2, where you're getting siege. So maybe Greek's is a little bit more of a fortification building than a production building, but you still get your heroes out of it. You also get the powerful units in the Mythic Age. I mean, in other words, I don't think that a solution to the crazy building increase or damage increase for castles of 50% is to say, let's just increase the cost of castles. I mean, should they have been buffed? This is debatable. But one thing's for sure, there is a number between 0 and 50% that should have been tried first. One thing that I've noticed right now, and maybe this was true in the previous patch as well, but I don't really see a reason to be building archers anymore with some civs. As memey as this sounds, I think it's probably better to just build infantry, siege, and castles and towers. Give it a try and tell me how you guys go. So let's be pragmatic here. Let's say the numbers are all correct and the majority wants buildings to continue to be this strong. What are some things that could potentially happen to help bring balance to the forefront? Well, free in-base defense needs to be limited. 4 free towers, 20 range town center, something needs to give here. The most radical idea I've had is to remove all the free towers and also remove classical free myth units to limit some cheese and roll the dice to see what breaks. I'm no game dev, but if it works in Age of Empires 2, it works in Age of Empires 4, why wouldn't it work in Age of Mythology as well? However, a more simple solution would be to just agree that the mark was overshot, and taking a step back would be a step forward. There's a number somewhere in the middle where the game can still function without need for drastic balance changes. Moving on, the villager change moved from 15 seconds to 18 seconds. I've heard everything under the sun from, I don't notice this at all, to the game is so slow now. And to be honest, the truth is somewhere in the middle. My initial thoughts were raiding would be more effective. Booming would be less effective. Timing attack effectiveness would be much the same, if not more effective, as you'd get a much larger window to actually hit the attack. Unfortunately, you can't take this change without also taking in everything else as well. Here's a list of things which were brought up around this that I think are pretty accurate, and shout out to El Matador for this list. While raiding is technically more effective, practically speaking, you can't do much thanks to the tower change, unless you have access to raiding myth units like the Yatza, Valkyrie, or a Nubite. Losing units hurts more because of slower economic setup, meaning taking risks is a lot riskier. All destructive god powers have been ninja buffed, whether it be killing villages, army, or buildings due to the slower economy. And finally, all god-specific eco bonuses have been left untouched, becoming more impactful. For example, Flood of the Nile, Vaults of Erebus, the China Favor Gather rate. I think the change made sense on paper, but practically speaking, it probably did more harm than good. This isn't a middle ground thing like the towers. We either stay with it and figure out what the numbers for the ecotext need to be, or we return to the 15-second villager times. I've put a poll out in regards to the villager change to see what you guys think about it, but realistically speaking, I don't think this matters as much as everything else in this patch. And finally, the caravan buff. This is the ninja change everyone sort of missed, and no one is really paying attention to. Well, not no one, some people are. A complaint in the last patch that I read sometimes was that we don't have enough income in the late game. We have to spend so many resources on army and can't afford to do anything else. The way that I saw it was, if I took a good fight, I get extra resources because I don't have to invest it in my army again to build on my position, whether that be like throwing down some towers, getting a castle up, putting walls, putting more production facilities down. If I lost the fight, well, I'd have to retreat. My opponent does the same thing, and then I have to regroup and try and take another good fight to then push my opponent back. A little bit of tug of war, so to speak. Right now, I don't think it matters if I take a good fight or not. My income is through the roof. I can spam buildings for days without second thought, and really only get punished if my opponent's civ has got better stuff than mine does. For example, the Egyptian catapult. I do not like this. For me, spam wars are not fun. They're not fun to watch, and I'd rather just go next. Anyway, in conclusion, I think the patch is salvageable. I'm not 100% doom and gloom, but I miss the days of being on the edge of my seat trying to defend what my opponent is doing, rather than sort of zoning out and waiting for my economy to come online so that I can just steamroll through the guy that was trying to make something happen. The longer we play this patch, the better players will become at playing a defensive game, and the less crazy one-townsender ideas we will see being effective. At the very top level, slight timings of creaking out one extra range siege weapon can be the difference between winning and losing a game. One god power giving a big enough advantage over to a player to then happily slap a castle down, sealing the victory, will become more and more common. Anyways, let me know what you guys think. I'm just one guy. My opinion is worth one guy's opinion. But if you see what I see and you feel what I feel, make your voice heard. Equally, if you disagree, put a comment in. Hit the subscribe button, and I'll see you guys in the next game.